So we have one more week now in this current sermon series on having a courageous home. Next week we'll jump into a similar one in that we're going to talk about being a courageous church. So both will jump out of this passage from Joshua 24 verse 15, where Joshua himself, he declares to the Israelites his allegiance to God. He's challenging them to choose this day whom they will serve, the gods of the Canaanites or the gods of the Egyptians and their forefathers, or the one true God. And he declares this oath before God and the Israelites. He says, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And so we're talking about the home, our households that we have in our homes, but starting next week we're going to talk about this home, this household as well, and being a courageous church, one that chooses together to stand and serve the Lord wholeheartedly. It's my desire, hopefully our desire, through the series we've been in, and we spent time in Ephesians 5 2 weeks ago, and then we'll be in Ephesians 6 today, but hopefully our goal is that every home that's represented here would choose to live courageously serving the Lord. Have you ever wondered, though, how in the world you got two kids in the home, same parents, maybe godly parents, or these kids are getting the same godly teaching, and one is wholeheartedly committed to the Lord, and the other is not. You ever wonder how that can happen? I mean, how is it that two kids can get something so very different from their upbringing, especially when their upbringing is one where the parents try really hard to bring them up in the Lord? It's really a complicated question. I mean, every home is different. You know, I look at other preachers and their families, and some of them, they are the typical preacher's kids, right? And then there are some of my peers and friends that I had in college and whatever, and all of their kids, they're all going off to Bible college, and they're all going into ministry, and they're marrying Christian husbands and wives and whatever. And I mean, it's like, how does it happen that in some homes you have maybe one or both or all of the kids not accept the Lord, and in some homes you have all of them, in some homes it's divided? It's really a complicated question and dilemma that really involve a lot of different factors, I think, that go into it. I mean, there's different personalities, situations. Every kid faces different pressures, and even to some degree some different social environments, and more often, those things help inform or even determine how each different family member responds to the gospel of Jesus even in the home. So, you know the old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but what? You can't make him drink. That's absolutely true. But I think the key for every Christian home is that we provide water from which to drink. Primarily for us, we're talking about the living water, right? Jesus says to the woman at the well, he says to her, drink from the water that I give you, the living water, and you'll never thirst again. We want to be able to provide in our homes the living water for our children to drink. And listen, again, you can't make them drink from the living water, but if we don't provide the living water in our homes, what will they have a less likely chance of ever drinking from? The living water, right? So our goal is to provide it, to make it an available choice, so that we don't hear the words that Joshua said. He says, is serving the Lord undesirable to you? We at least want to make it available so that it's desirable a desirable option for our children to drink from. So we're going to look at Ephesians chapter 6. We're going to look at the first 4 verses and talk about from 2 different perspectives here. We have a word to children and a word to parents. Let's pray. Father, I thank you so much for your word that teaches us and admonishes us and encourages us and strengthens and builds us up. Help us to listen well and help us to put it into practice. Lord, you are deserving of our worship, our service. You are worthy of our entire lives. May we lay ourselves before you sacrificially as we engage with your word and your teaching here through the Apostle Paul. May it be a word for each one of us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so here we go. Let's jump in to Ephesians chapter 6. We're going to just start with the first 3 verses. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. Of course, he's quoting here from one of the 10 commandments. He says, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise specific to the person who obeys it, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Okay, so not all of us in this room have children yet, right? Okay, but all of us have one thing in common. We are all what? Children, all right? So this applies to us. Paul is speaking to children. It doesn't matter how old you are. You don't have to be, how old are these guys? 4, 5, 3, 2, whatever they are, the little ones, or teenagers, or 20-somethings. You don't have to be children that are living in your parents' home still. This applies to children, period, which it applies to us. And obeying this particular teaching is a lifetime endeavor. So it's for us. So you adults with children, you adults with no children, you adults with children that are adults themselves with their own children, listen, don't shut your ears off or your hearts off, because this particular passage, this command is for us. All right? But this command inevitably comes with a very difficult question attached to it, doesn't it? Think about the homes, think about children whose parents asked them to do or commanded them to do some very ungodly things. How does this passage, where Paul says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right, honor your father and mother, how does it apply to children whose parents maybe ask some really horrible things, or command that they do some horrible things? But I'm not going to go through some list of some horrible things. You've got an imagination. You can figure, maybe you lived it. What do you tell kids who have to go through this? What do you tell kids when they're asked to disobey God by a command given by their parent? I mean, I think of my wife for an example. All right? Her mother said, you can have a relationship with me when you stop having a relationship with God. So essentially, her mother's command is, give up your relationship with God and come have a relationship with me. What do you tell a kid whose mom has asked her to do something like that in light of this command? Obey your parents. So it's complicated, isn't it? It's complicated. I think, though, the very first thing we need to understand is that this command to the children and the command that we're going to see, we're going to talk about in verse 4 here in just a minute, to parents, it comes within a bigger context. So I want you to look back to Ephesians chapter 4, look at verse 32, and we're going to read down to chapter 5, verse 2. It's only a few verses. Let me read this and begin to give us, kind of shape the context that we have this command within. Paul says to the church, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you. Be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children, and live a life of love, just as Christ loved us, and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Now look at verse 21 of chapter 5, which is really the beginning of the husbands, wives, children, parents, slave, master, that section of teaching. He says this, submit to one another out of reverence to Christ. Okay, so this is the bigger context from which Paul gives us the command to obey our parents and honor our mother and our father, right? The key for us in this context is to understand, I think, that first and foremost, we ourselves and our children, all of us, we are dearly loved children of God, and He treats us with love and kindness and compassion, right? So it's important for us to understand the importance of mutual love, kindness, and compassion. Because God treats us this way, we treat one another with this same kind of approach. Love, kindness, compassion. Both parents and children are to be imitators of God in the way they treat each other. Of course, Paul we do need to kind of back up and make sure we understand. Paul is writing to the church here. Okay, so it's implied that Paul believes that the kids' parents, that he's he's speaking to the kids, but what he believes is that their parents are striving to imitate God in love and kindness and compassion and all of these things, right? So kids should obey their parents as their parents are, ready for this? Obeying God. It's a bigger context. If we understand it through that lens, kids are to obey their parents as their parents are obeying God. It's kind of Paul's statement. Remember when he says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Follow me as I follow Christ. So, but for the sake of argument here, because even though this, asking the question about what should kids do in regards to parents who are asking them to do ungodly things, it doesn't really fit within the context, but it's such an important question. I think we still need to address it, all right? Even though it's not specifically answered here, I think there's a broader principle that we can learn from. But most importantly, what I think we have to be able to say up front is every situation is different. So the situation you came from and maybe never really got this answered to, and the situation your neighbor's kids are in, or the kids that are in the church that don't have godly parents, every situation is different and unique. So the first thing we have to do is remember, you can't just put one condition onto something and one answer and say this fits every situation. So we have to be really careful how we counsel families that are in really tough situations where the kids, maybe the kid is a Christ follower but the parent is not, or you're trying to help a neighbor kid or something. We have to be very careful how we counsel and what we tell children to do in their specific situation. But it might be helpful if we recognize there really are at least, and I'm just going to put them in 3 categories, 3 different types of disobedience. Okay? There's probably a lot more, and I didn't consult some psychologist journal or anything. This is just by my observation, there's at least 3 different types of disobedience, and I think it will help answer some of this dilemma that we might have. First of all, there is disobedience that is at its core pure defiance and rebellion and just a complete disrespect and regard for the parents, right? In that case, this applies to those kids, and we say, knock it off, right? Now, they may be this way because of what we're going to talk about later, and we might be able to fix some of this deliberate defiance by the way we parent. But sometimes the kids can't change their parents, and so we have to help them through differently. The second type of disobedience, there is just a disobedience that's just purely out of curiosity, ignorance. I mean, kids just push boundaries, right? They're going to try to figure out how far can they go. Can they do this and not get in trouble? Can they do that and kind of get in trouble, but the consequence is worth it, right? Or, they're just going to kind of test the limits and the boundaries of your patience and of your ability to follow through on consequences and so forth. I mean, kids will, in some ways, just be kids, and that's okay. And yet, at the same time, this applies. And kids need to learn to obey even when they don't like obeying. Even when they want to push the limits, they need to obey anyway because it's right. And then there's the disobedience that we've sort of been addressing a little bit that comes out of a genuine concern for what has been asked of me. And the response has to be, I will not obey when it goes against my biblical values. Period. So, of course, in each of these, there it comes with its own unique answers to the question, but let's just answer it broadly this way for now. How many of you were in the military? When a commanding officer told you to do something, you did what? You did it. And you did it without what? Arguing or questioning. When you're told to do something, you do it, period, unless whatever you're ordered to do is deliberately unlawful or clearly violates the Constitution of the United States. And then you might have a leg to stand on if you disobey the chain of command. And it's just as important for me to obey my parents without question until what they say is clearly unlawful or violation of the Word of God. But my responsibility as a child, and I know it's hard for you guys to hear this, right? But it's my responsibility as a child, my parents, to obey, period. It doesn't mean you can't ever question, you can't ever ask why, but you can't ever say no, just because you don't like what a parent says. And it doesn't matter how old you are. Okay? It doesn't matter if your parents are still living or not. Okay? If you know something your parents would have told you to do or not to do and you don't do it, then we're breaking this command. Okay? So it doesn't matter how old you are. So it applies to me as well as it applies to these two over here and these three over here and you back there and you back there. I mean, it applies. And even you. Right? Okay? It applies. We all obey our parents, period, without question until it clearly violates the law or God's word. So ultimately, though, right, a person's responsibility, his first responsibility is to obey and honor God above anyone else. In fact, the apostles said, they're like, Peter, they were paraded before the Sanhedrin, and he said, I will obey God, not man's law. He says, I must obey God's law and not man's. And think about Jesus in the temple. Jesus was perfect, right? But his parents were frantic. He was about 12 years old. They thought he was lost. And where did they find him? In the temple. He didn't didn't tell him where he was going to be. He just was like, you should have known this is where I was going to be. There are times when it's okay to follow God and not your parents, because it's both honoring to God and to your parents. So what do I mean by this? Idea of honor means to hold in high regard, right? Think about this for a minute. I cannot hold my parents in high regard. I cannot think highly of them if I support or participate in their own defiance of God. If my dad is in just clear defiance of God and he tells me to do something, not only is my first responsibility to God, but I cannot hold my dad in high regard if I just blindly follow him. It's telling my dad, I don't care about your degree. So I cannot honor God by disobeying my parents, and yet at the same time, I cannot honor my parents when they are in defiance of God, and I obey them blindly. It doesn't go together. I cannot be honoring to my parents and participate in or support their disobedience of God. The passage here, though, you understand, really is speaking mostly to these, and really speaking frankly to children who are like so many in today's culture, those who would willfully and purposefully speak disrespectfully to their parents. Tell me you've never seen a child speak just blatantly disrespectful to their parents. Raise your hand if you've never seen that, or never seen it on TV. It's because you've never done it. Good girl. Right? I mean, it is paraded on TV. It's shown as comedy on TV for kids to be blatantly disrespectful to their parents. And it's kind of infiltrated our culture. That's how kids are taught to treat their parents and other adults. Is you don't have to be respectful. You don't have to honor them. If you don't like what they do, then you speak to them how they want, and they'll eventually come around. I mean, parents are taught today, don't ever tell your kids no. Make them happy. As a parent, your priority is to make your kids happy. So give them what they want, buy them whatever they want, tell them whatever they want, so that they'll always be happy. That's today's culture, isn't it? What we're teaching our kids is to not honor and obey their parents, but we're teaching our parents to obey our children. It's flip-flopped. It's wrong. It's wrong. I mean, kids go out of their way to trash their parents on social media, and especially even to their faces. And we have to turn that back around and get it right side up now in the church today. This kind of behavior is intolerable. It can't happen. It can't happen. Sometimes, though, they learn it because we're so disrespectful to our kids. They don't know how to be respectful to us. But maybe your parents don't deserve your respect, right? But listen, God does. God deserves your respect. And the way that we speak to, and the way that we speak about our parents will either honor God or will dishonor God. We need to choose how we honor God by the words that we say about and to our parents. Paul says to obey our parents simply because it's the right thing to do. We were talking about it just briefly right at the end of Sunday school. Somebody brought up the fact that years ago, kids tended to do what their parents said without questioning at all. Now, we've taught our kids to question everything they're told to do. And sometimes, you know what? You just do it because it's the right thing to do, period. And that's okay. do it because it's right. Paul says you do it because it's the right thing to do. But the truth is as godly parents, you have to know that you play a huge role in helping your kids learn to obey this command. You are the primary teacher of the kids in obeying this command itself. Of course, we don't parent to be honored in order to be honored by our kids, but if we honor God, if we honor God first and we treat Him the way He would treat our kids, we begin to learn, we begin to teach our kids how to learn to honor God first, and then by honoring Him, guess what they'll do that'll be an unintended blessing for you? They'll learn how to honor by first learning how to honor God. Now, again, let me just say, it doesn't always happen. This is not a promise. If you do, then your kids will. There's too many homes that prove differently. But if you don't provide the living water from which to drink, they'll never be able to drink it. Right? Okay, so let's take a look at the job of parents as we try to help our kids be able to obey and honor parents by honoring God first. All right, so here we go, verse 4. It says, fathers, which implies and assumes mothers too. Fathers were the head of the household, and mothers followed the lead of the fathers when it came to parenting. Okay, so parents, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. See, okay, we got to remember putting this in this bigger context, right, between parents and children. Be kind and compassionate, parents. Be kind and compassionate. Imitating God. Now, how did God treat His children? Jesus gave Himself up for them, right? Sacrificed Himself for His children. We imitate God. We live a life of love, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. How many of you have ever been taught to submit yourself to your children? Teaching it to you now. Because Paul says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. It doesn't mean, submitting does not mean you do whatever they want. Any more than submitting to your husband, ladies, means doing whatever they want. Submitting has to do with thinking of them first, putting them above yourself, and sacrificing yourself for them. Parenting means submitting yourself even to your kids, right? So let's talk about this word exasperating for just a little bit. How can we exasperate our kids? Let me ask it to you this way. How can you exasperate your kids if you're kind, passionate, loving, and submitting yourself to them? Those don't go together, do they? You cannot exasperate if you are also kind, passionate, and loving. The word exasperate literally means to provoke them to anger, and it even means to irritate them, which I was really upset with when I read that, when I was doing this little bit of a word study on exasperate, because I love to irritate my kids. It's like one of my favorite pastimes, to irritate them as much as I possibly can for as long as I possibly can. But listen, there's a difference between just making them angry once in a while because you tell them to do something they don't want to do, or you won't let them do something they want to do. Making them angry and even irritating them, that's okay. What he's talking about here is like if you put a burr under the saddle of a horse and you leave it there, and you never remove the burr. Eventually, that horse, it'll change the horse's mood, and if left forever, it will eventually change the horse's temperament forever. And what exasperating here is talking about is changing our children's temperament forever. We don't want to change what God has made in our kids, the work that He has started. We don't want to change or interrupt or upset what God has done in them. God created them special, on purpose, with purpose, for a purpose, right? And we can either build on what God has started in them and created them to be, or we can tear it down. It's our responsibility to bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. The proverb writer says it this way. He says, train a child in the way he should go, right? Proverbs 22:6. If we bring them up in the Lord, then we're more likely, our kids are more likely to honor us because they will seek to honor God first. Okay, so here are 5 ways parents can avoid exasperating their children. You guys want this? It's not unique or original with me. I kind of adapted this a little bit from a great Focus on the Family article. Okay, it's really good. I'll just give you these 5 ways you can prevent yourself from exasperating your kids. All right, first of all, feed them God's Word regularly. If your family is together in God's Word, it'll go a lot further in providing them a living water from which to drink. You don't force feed them. You don't Bible thump them, and every time they do something wrong, you're like, yeah, but the Bible says, and you got it not because, and you thump them over the head with the Bible, and they're always wrong because the Bible says. You've just created a list of rules of do's and don'ts and this wrath and punishment of God, which is there, but it's not healthy to do it in a thumping, angry way, right? Help them learn to enjoy God's Word as a part of their lives. Second thing, be their biggest encourager. Be their biggest encourager. Listen, and this one's hard for me, but too much teasing, guess what? It's too much. Because eventually it can feel like you're deriding them, you're putting them down. Too much teasing can eventually feel like insulting. Especially when you're teasing them because you're really trying to veil something that you don't like about them. So be careful about teasing and teasing too much and how you go about it. Cheer them on, build them up, be their biggest cheerleader and encourager in life. Third thing, respect them deeply. Respect them. Try to avoid public embarrassment. Correct them quietly. And whenever possible, correct them in private, not public. Help them keep their dignity. But if you continually publicly embarrass them, they lose that. Respect them. Number 4, be kind and show them goodness. And show them how to live a joy-filled life. Make certain that there is joy in your home. They'll catch on to that. Doesn't mean your home is always happy, but it's always filled with joy. Because whenever troubles come, you know where your hope lies and whom it lies. And there's joy in your home. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to tell them no. But it is not okay to be an angry person. And if you are an angry person, get the help you need. So that your kids don't become angry people. And number 5, just love them unconditionally. Love them with a biblical kind of love. Understand what true love, real love is. Godly love. Understand that. Figure that out. And love them that way. I mean, what does Peter say, or John says, God, we know what love is because Jesus died for us. We know what love is. God is love. Just read 1 Corinthians 13. Love is kind. Love is patient, right? So figure out what love is and love them and passionately love them. All right, so what if I've already exasperated my kids, all right? For those of you who have already exasperated your kids, or maybe you were a kid that were exasperated, okay? Let's just talk about that for a minute. I've already messed up. How do I fix this? I've already messed it up. How do I fix it? Sonny shared with me earlier in the week, a story out of Reader's Digest I thought was fantastic and really works well as an illustration here. It was about a 21-year-old veteran. He was in Iraq, and he was given an order to shoot at your discretion. They were watching a truck come towards them, and he was given the command, shoot at your discretion. And he retells what was racing through his mind as he was waiting for this vehicle to come into range. He said this: it was a lesson, what was going on in his mind was a lesson that his father had taught him 10 years ago before they went hunting for the first time. He said, the father said to his son, when you pull the trigger, the consequences are yours forever. He said, you can't take a bullet back. Once you pull the trigger, it's forever. He said, son, this is not a movie. It's not a video game. No matter how many times you say, I'm sorry, it was an accident, I didn't mean to. He said, that bullet never comes back. He said, son, I'm not trying to scare you, but rifles are for men, not boys. If you take this and we go shooting, you need to accept responsibility every time you pull the trigger. Every bullet, forever. Think about this, parents. Our words are like those bullets. And if we're going to shoot them, we have to be willing to accept responsibility for every word, every time we pull the trigger. Every word. If you've already exasperated your kids, let me just encourage them. Own it. Take responsibility for it. Apologize for it. And repent from it. Pride can get in the way, and we can always, blame shift. Well, it was my kid's fault because, or it was my parents' fault because they did this, and I just... Enough. Take responsibility for every bullet you shoot. And listen, it's never too late for you to put a new bullet in your gun. It's never too late to let kindness and compassionate words of love, become that new bullet. But remember, it took a long time for your kid to become exasperated. That burr was under the saddle for a long time. It wasn't just a once or a 2 or 3 time thing. It was something that was under there a long time. It took a long time for exasperation to take place, for that bitterness and the anger to grow into bitterness and resentment. It took a long time, so it's not going to take just one apology to fix everything. It's going to take time to heal. It's going to take time to go from exasperated to no longer exasperated. So I just want to leave you with this. Submit to God first. Children, parents, submit to God first. Right? Then submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So parents, love your children. Discipline them lovingly and with a kind heart. Show them what it is to be loved by God, our Father in heaven. And maybe, just maybe, because you've provided for them the living water, that's what they'll drink. And they'll honor God. And by a surprise blessing to you,